Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today from what looks to be quite a wide range of geographies and organisations and sectors. So we really appreciate you spending this time with us for this webinar on equipping ourselves to lead in what is becoming a new and emerging world. So I'm Peter Stone, Managing Partner here at Psionic, and today I'll be joined by three of my colleagues, Paul, Deborah and Aaron. And between us, we share over 100 years of experience within financial services, developing leadership behaviours from early career to C-suite executives, unlocking the value of specialists in firms, and building cultures of high performance. Now, we believe that leadership is not just a role in a hierarchy, that it's very much a mindset and a set of behaviours that anyone at any level can perform. And we've spent the last 6 months surveying and researching with participants on our development programs and events, specifically looking at performance and leadership in the environment that we've all been operating in for the last several months. And from that survey and research and from our own experiences, we see a massive opportunity now and a massive opportunity in what is emerging in our operating worlds to lead people differently and to do so by and make a huge difference to people's lives whilst unlocking motivation and discretionary effort. So in that context, we have a view that is, why would we ever want to go back to what people call the old normal, as opposed to, as leaders, creating a very new normal for ourselves in the way we lead people. So today we want to share with you where and how to realize that opportunity. We want to share with you a formula for unlocking performance, and we want to share with you some tools and some approaches that will help you make a practical difference. Now, it's a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this event so that we can share it with you afterwards. Your video and audio anonymity is guaranteed, so nobody will be identifiable in any format. We also have a takeaway that we will send to you as well. And then finally, please do engage with us through the chat with your comments, with questions, which we will respond to throughout, but also through the various polls and prompts and little exercises that you'll see through the session too. So with that, I'll wish you a very good session and thank you, and hand you over to Deborah.
Thank you so much, Pete. And as we look to 2021, I think the big question is, what will work look like? I want to spend the next 10 minutes or so focusing on the actions you can take as leaders to shape how your people work. To start with, I want you to reflect on your own people, and I'd like you to answer the two questions I'm going to put up in a minute. Emma, are you ready to launch the poll and question one? Brilliant. So question one is, how has home working impacted the motivation of the people in your organisation? 1, very negatively, 6, very positively. Please enter your thoughts. So what have we got? So we've got the sort of, in essence, positively. Yep. Yep. So we share, yep. Yep. This absolutely is in line with what we've been seeing as well, and I'm going to come on to that. So there has been some negative impact, but it's definitely less than 50%, if not less than 40%. But a lot of people are seeing what we've been seeing, which is that sort of it's impacted people positively and impacted their motivation. Thank you. Emma, can you launch the second poll of our two, which is what split of at-home versus in-office working would you advocate once it is safe to return to offices? I love watching these polls move. Yeah. So the all at home, the other, no, there's a sense there of 50-50 with a sort of third thinking 75 at home, 25 in the office. Again, your responses are in line with what many of the surveys and articles are saying, which is working at home has accelerated, and a lot of positives about working at home that we as leaders should build into our ways of working in 2021. What we specifically see is, in terms of the top three issues, collaboration, communication, loneliness, and not being able to unplug are some of the big struggles. And the survey which we did of a significant population of knowledge workers revealed that 43% were working longer hours. And I think, I will share with you, as a Myers-Briggs extrovert, I struggle a little bit with a lack of face-to-face contact when it comes to things like innovating with my team. However, a number of my colleagues who are more introvert on the Myers-Briggs spectrum find at home working very, very productive. So let's return to the positives, because it's the positives that we're here to consider today, and how as leaders we maximize those positives. Now, if we can move to the next slide. So from our survey, which I've mentioned, what we are seeing is 61% of people have said their work-life balance has improved. And then 48% of the same survey population had a higher motivation, with 38% saying their motivation was the same. So in fact, it was only 14% of our survey population that said they'd had a drop in motivation. So I think the key thing here is, despite the very real physical and mental challenges of remote working, it's possible to improve people's work-life balance and motivation as leaders. And I think that's a very, very important finding. People have adapted, as we know, to home working. They've used that wasted commute time to better purpose, to manage childcare, to spend time with pets, to spend time doing sport. But what is also key, and what was highlighted in our survey, was that management effort, leadership effort in terms of catch-ups, check-ins, virtual social gatherings are the things that are also helping people get the best out of working at home. Our survey also highlighted that people do want in-person working for certain things: career development, networking, unexpected connections, conflict resolution, listening to others, and that all-important longer-term well-being. And I think the key message here is, choose the blended working model that works for your organisation. And we're going to help you think through what the blended working model might be, and again, what you as a leader can do. And so this brings me to the first of our frameworks that we want to share with you today. We call it the leadership lens, because as leaders, we need to have a dual focus. Let's look at the left-hand side. Our focus on the left is what we call the science of leadership. It's probably what you're all focused on at the moment: commercial priorities, year-end, budget setting, objectives for 2021, all of those hard things as a leader, in terms of hard items that are really, really important, and in essence manifest themselves in the employment contract. However, it's the right-hand side, the art of leadership. And I ask yourself, and I urge you to ask yourself now, how much time are you spending as this year comes to a close on that art of leadership, and thinking through the things that are listed on that slide there, the skills and knowledge that individuals need next year to work effectively, the employee value proposition, how that might change with a blended way of working, and what roles are best done at home versus in person once we can return to a blended working way of working, and also not what new working practices are important in order to build that communication, community, and show that caring to people. I would say that quite a few of us are probably distracted by the science side, by the employment contract, by mobilising our organisation in terms of budgets. And I urge you now to think about this right-hand side, this art of leadership. What do people need? Because this is where you've got the greatest scope to enhance the motivation and work-life balance of people, and in so doing, increase the performance of your organisation. Another way of looking at this is, we call it unlocking. Chasing results on the left-hand side is a management approach, while creating the conditions to unlock performance is absolutely leadership. And in terms of leadership, let's go back over. Those new skills are managing a diverse population, getting the best out of the introvert, the extrovert. The employee value proposition is, what are you as a leader going to give back? The roles are not necessarily just saying to people once a week, we all come to the office because that's when we do our meetings. And obviously, new working practices, it's the effort you put in to staying connected. So, unlocking this balance, I want to share with you a formula that we've come up with that really helps unlock this balance. Because performance from the people you lead can be significantly enhanced if you think of the equation in this way. If you think of compassion plus trust plus community, and minimize the self-orientation. So let me just quickly tell you what we mean by compassion. Compassion is proactively exploring the flexibility your staff need and working around their personal circumstances. Ask yourself the question, are you a I need this tomorrow style leader? Because tomorrow doesn't always give you the best output or outcome. A day later might give you a better outcome from your team. And to be compassionate, you also need to trust. You need to trust people to be working in their own way and not checking on deliverables as a way of checking that they are working. And then there's the community. They're bringing people together for the reasons our survey highlighted earlier, and to extend that networking, to develop ideas, to share best practice, and to care. But the most important thing in terms of unlocking performance is, as a leader, it's not about you, it's about them. And I love this quote at the bottom. As a leader, you can achieve anything you want if you are prepared to let others take the glory. So I'm now going to hand over to Paul and Aaron, who will expand on how to unlock performance with this equation at the heart of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. So how do you build the compassion, trust and community and minimize self-orientation? So building on what the performance equation we just showed you, we'd like to share this model that we've developed, which has 5 elements, 5 steps in it that we found really help to achieve it. And we'll walk you through the actions that you can take to support all the elements that Deborah just went through of that performance formula. So to do this and sort of bring it to life, we're going to combine a number of our experiences with some different clients into a fictional company, so we can just bring it all together. We're going to call it Old Broad Street Bank. We'll talk about the challenges that they faced, what they did, and therefore, you know, what you could maybe take from that and do yourselves, as well as engaging you and getting your input on each of these elements. So starting with agreeing purpose. So what the bank, Old Broad Street Bank, discovered was after the novelty of working from home had faded, the bank noticed a drop in motivation and engagement. People had begun to wonder what was the point of it all, what was the purpose of their work. It turned out the bank had 3 real issues. Firstly, the purpose was not clear to people and not shared very often. Secondly, leaders liked it, but it didn't resonate with employees. They didn't feel anything about it. And then thirdly, there was significant inconsistency in messaging from leaders. Some were super optimistic about how things were going to go back to normal, it was all going to be fine, and some were quite demoralized. Both styles had a negative effect on their people, and we'll talk about why in a minute. So what did the bank do? They basically really listened to and understood what employees felt, and therefore adapted their stated purpose to align with corporate goals and employee views. They then weave that purpose into day-to-day communications to make sure it was never very far from the conversation. And we'll see why that's important in a minute. Critically, they got their leaders to employ what we call bounded optimism. So that means you're positive about the future. There is some good, and as we've seen from our survey and from everything we're sharing today, there's a lot of positivity to engage with. But you're realistic about the present, and therefore you're more authentic. And importantly, as a set of leaders, consistent. And then finally, to show how serious they were about the purpose and how important it was to them, they used it as a lens to prioritise what work was being done. They built it into their decision-making processes, and it had a radical effect on both achieving the outcomes they desired and trusting their teams with the autonomy to make purpose-based decisions. So the key takeaway from this step is, this is a once-in-a-generation chance to re-engage with your people through the purpose. So I'd like to hear from you now. So Emma, if you could just bring up the next poll, really want to understand, do you know your purpose statement of you in your firms? Well, it's a very positive start. Let's see, we've got nearly everyone responding. Okay, so let's end that there. So basically, we're seeing that most of you do know. That's a pretty good percentage, 67%. So that's promising. So again, then the next question, Emma, if you can bring up the next poll, is does it need to be updated given everything you've learned? Okay. So we're seeing kind of a split there. So about as many people, for slightly more people saying yes and maybe than saying no. So that's interesting. So over half potentially think it might need a bit of a revision. And I think, the first question is ask your people what they think. That would be my first suggestion, to see what they think about it. So I'd like to hand over now to Aaron to take us through the next section in the wheel. Aaron, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So let's look at equipping others and what Old Broad Street Bank did. So firstly, they acknowledged there were two key challenges that were needing to be urgently addressed, and they were intertwined. Firstly, around COVID, the pandemic is an upheaval. It's not just that we've chosen to move to working from home or remote working. This is a significant societal change. And the situation is taking its toll, because becoming a dispersed workforce has been forced upon us, and that creates so much uncertainty. It also compromises our autonomy, which will have a direct impact potentially on our psychological and mental well-being. So that's the first challenge. And then combined with the second challenge around burnout, in 2019, the World Health Organization officially defined burnout as an occupational phenomenon. So this is something that was already on the radar, it was on the agenda, it had to be addressed, and now it's been exponentially impacted by the pandemic. So in 2021, what can we anticipate seeing? Well, potentially a deterioration of mental and emotional well-being, as people might start to mourn the way we were, and also deal with the ongoing uncertainty and reduced autonomy that they're experiencing. So the actions that Old Broad Street Bank took, and potentially you might consider taking as well, is firstly being open to human vulnerability. So having that approach is about being okay to not be okay. And then as a next step, what can you do to act in service of your team? And acting in service really does epitomize compassion. When we talk about compassion, we compare it to empathy, where empathy is around understanding and relating to other people's emotions or experiences. And compassion is empathy plus wanting to do something to help or alleviate those experiences. So that's a wonderful combination in terms of leaders having the opportunity to help. So acting in service at Old Broad Street Bank meant things like approving expense submissions around new monitors and desks for at-home working, also encouraging teams to use other resources like the Employee Assistance Program. They also considered reviewing their absence policy to make it more in line with people being honest about the fact that some days they just had no energy or they really were struggling. They even started to consider their employment contracts from a perspective of, should there be a shift around moving from standard working hours to more a kind of outcome measurement or around energy that people have. So it's very much that kind of moving and transitioning from the science to the art of leadership. On the third step, the action they took is providing training, providing resources around resilience and well-being, which included training around resilience and emotion regulation, which is how to deal with emotion once it's emerged. Also, they conducted training on mindfulness, which is about connecting to the present moment during the workday and beyond. The third step, they looked at training for focused attention with the acknowledgement that we're all so distracted potentially by working from home with the cat, the dog, the kids, Amazon deliveries, and everything else that we're trying to deal with as we work from home and conduct our daily work. And the fourth step, they conducted training on wellbeing, specifically centered around autonomy, which, as I mentioned previously, can really impact psychological and mental wellbeing. So the key takeaway here in essence is, in order to equip others, we can strengthen the psychological contract by really focusing on what other people need from us. So as an activity, what I'd really like to do is understand from your perspectives, where are you seeing your organizations are showing an openness to vulnerability, to human vulnerability? I'd love to hear some ideas in terms of what things your organizations are doing, maybe also what your organizations could look at doing. And as the chat comes in, I'll share with you a quote from a professor of social psychology at the University of St. Andrews. This is from Stephen Riker. He says that by providing people with the autonomy to make their own decisions, you encourage people to take more responsibility and become actively engaged in working out the best choice to make. So that's very nicely aligned to well-being and autonomy and what we can do to equip others. Okay, great. So training on resilience, is an organisation doing that? Excellent. Training mental health first aiders, great. And having mental health meetings, mindfulness sessions, and putting in place a carers policy. It's really wonderful to hear some of your organisations are really embracing the fact that we as humans are vulnerable. And another suggestion around the social get-togethers virtually. Okay, they're all coming in now. This is excellent. There's lots of really great initiatives happening at organisations around equipping others. Wellbeing, business champion, excellent. And I love that. Accepting what was unacceptable before COVID, like a high level of work from home. Employee surveys, fantastic. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. It's really great to hear your organisations are on the ball in terms of understanding that human vulnerability is a huge element that we need to really embrace now in our new way of working. Back over to you, Paul.
Brilliant. Thank you, Aaron. So on to the next stage in this wheel. So building connections. An obvious challenge with long-term working from home is the lack of social interaction and a breakdown in networking. And at the bank, they noticed many people withdrawing from the organisation. They categorised their issues into two key areas. So some people are naturally reserved and quiet, and for them, extended work from home made this worse by not being in the room with the rest of their team. These people became even less visible in meetings. They contributed less, which caused them to not feel valued, which caused them to not even try to contribute, and so on in a vicious circle. That was the first issue. And then the second issue is, people need social interaction. So they need to feel like they belong to something, to a community or something. And that wasn't happening so much. So to overcome the first issue, the bank employed what we call collaborative intelligence techniques. So let me explain what I mean by that. This ensures that when people are getting together, everyone is listened to, everyone is understood, ideas are not rejected out of hand, but they're plussed. And by plussing, we mean you take an idea and you build it across the whole team. You don't just shoot it down. It might not be the best idea, but you can take some elements from it and build it. And as a result, everyone feels bought into it and listened to. So the result of that was a significant equalization, let's call it, of contribution across the teams. To build, of course, Elias is mentioning he's using CIQ. That's great to hear. Fantastic. So on building community, they employ two mechanisms. Firstly, they use communities of practice. So that brought together people with similar work-related interests to share knowledge and best practice and build capability for the whole firm in this area. They realised that previously such communities were not being valued as the contribution and membership weren't recognised. So it was always just a discretionary side of desk activity with no payback for members. To counter this, they ensured that the key communities were properly sponsored by leaders and equipped and supported. Critically, they put in place a reward mechanism for contribution to communities that recognised that discretionary effort people were putting in. They launched, or in some cases relaunched, a number of communities around some key business priorities with senior level sponsorship, major profile, and a recognition for those that contributed. After 6 months of this, the communities are flourishing, they've got more members, and there's more knowledge sharing going across organisational boundaries. Now it's a positive thing to be part of a community, and it's career advancing. Plus it gives people that much needed social interaction. And then the final aspect of building community is something that we call community collisions. So I'm sure everyone recognises the difficulty in those sort of unplanned water cooler corridor meetings that used to happen. So what Old Broad Street Bank did was create a simple solution to create these community collisions that used 5-minute meetings at set times during the week to randomly connect people, which enabled them to build their networks and again, give them that interaction that they crave so much. So the key takeaway here really is people are most effective and happy as part of a community where they can be heard, learn and contribute. So again, I would like to hear from you, just in terms of chatting in, what you have done to build connection across your teams, and is there anything we've just shared that you think you could take back, perhaps? So I'm just looking at the chat now. Yes, so e-coffee. So that's a bit like the same kind of theme as we just said with these community collisions. This way of just getting people to sort of bump into each other and have a coffee and just catch up. So yeah, a couple of you are suggesting that. Anything else? Okay, yep, quizzes, yep. Oh, nice one. Okay, buddying people across geographies. Yeah, that's a nice thing because then you get a different perspective on things. I like that. Informal Zoom lunches, great. Yes, Christmas parties. Yeah, we can't avoid having one of those. Very good. Very good. Okay. Community of practice, excellent. Fundraising, always good. Yep, yep. End of week wind down meeting. That's a great example. Brilliant. No, only rule is no work talk. I like it. Yeah, fantastic. So thank you for that. So I'm going to just still got some things coming in, but I'm going to move it on in the interest of time back to Aaron to take us through what we mean by be curious.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So again, back to Old Broad Street Bank and what they experienced. So they noticed two challenges in this area around the poor visibility that they had on the individual context of the people in their workforce. So you just don't know what someone's experiencing on a day-to-day basis when you're not sitting next to them in the office, for example. And then that tends to create a natural tension, or it leads to and connects to the natural tension between what you need out of your people and what they need from you. So it's a really important challenge to address in order to create those conditions to unlock performance. So what Old Broad Street Bank did was suggest that people in leadership and across the organisation tune in at 5 levels. So firstly, self as an individual. So this is very much a how are you kind of conversation you can have with yourself. What's happening behind closed doors that you're not necessarily telling the organisation? So noticing things like, how are your stress triggers coming up for you, and what's really, really happening behind closed doors for you throughout the pandemic and in response to this new working environment that we find ourselves in. Next, at that second level, what about yourself as a leader? What can you be curious about here? What is on display, and how does your leadership style potentially need to evolve to match what's happening in your teams? Third, the relationships that you have with others. And this is very much, there's an old saying about put yourself in someone else's shoes. we like to think of it as actually you can't fit somebody else's shoes necessarily. So what about understanding what it's like for someone to walk a mile in their shoes, rather than us trying to attempt to understand someone's context, which we're really not going to have a lot of insight to necessarily. And then there's also the relationships that others have. So what do they need to be curious about? And this is very much linked to number 4, the people as individuals. So what's happening for people? And if you can understand that from a leadership perspective, then you're very much going to be able to understand how you can act in service by removing constraints and barriers. So one really useful method to raise awareness around experience at an individual level for the self and for others is around mindfulness. And Old Broad Street Bank joined the Mindful Workplace community, which was established earlier this year as a primary forum for the international conversation on workplace mindfulness. They also introduced daily mindfulness practices that they offered not just to colleagues, but also to clients. And they participated in a 30-day global mindfulness challenge in October of this year, and were delighted to see over 5% of their workforce actually choosing to take part. So the key takeaway is really about how you can ignite curiosity and promote curiosity at every level for everyone in the organisation. And now we might take you out of your comfort zone a tiny bit here, because what we're actually going to do is a very short mindfulness practice. So some of you on the call might be mindfulness practitioners, and therefore you'll probably be very happy about having a moment. And for others of you, this might be the first time you've experienced mindfulness. So what we're going to do is use a definition of mindfulness, which is very basic, and it's around being here, not there, and seeing what's here. And this practice is going to take a maximum of 2 minutes. So if you'd like to get started, if you're comfortable closing your eyes where you are now, then please do so. If that's uncomfortable in any way, then just soften your gaze. And by that, I mean not necessarily focusing on anything in particular. If you're sitting, if you have your legs crossed, potentially uncrossing your legs so you've got both feet flat on the floor. And then maintaining a dignified posture, so having a back that's upright and straight, but not too rigid and not too slouched over either. And then I want you to just bring your attention to breathing. Perhaps taking a couple of longer in-breaths. See how your breathing is in this moment. There's no need to change it. It might be longer or slower than normal, or the same as you usually find it. Just being curious about what you see is here now. And now expanding your attention to also take in the sounds around you. So focusing on breathing and sounds. Maybe you're in the office and there's sounds of other people in the office, or it's more likely you're at home. So maybe sounds of appliances, animals, sounds from outside, maybe neighbours or traffic. And as you do so, thoughts will continue to pop into your mind, and that is completely natural. Just bring your attention back by focusing on breathing or sounds, whatever feels most right for you. And as we come to the end of this practice, taking a couple of slightly longer in-breaths and elongating the out-breath so it's a little bit longer than your in-breath. And that sends your body a message to say it's okay, you can relax just a little. Okay, and that's that. So we'll finish that very short mindfulness practice now. Hopefully, for those of you that haven't experienced that before, you can see how actually you could integrate this into your standard daily routine, just to give you a sense of being curious around what's happening for you now as an individual. So back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Aaron. So on the last stage or step of this, keep adapting. So having been through some pretty seismic changes, the Old Broad Street Bank realized the way they'd operated before was geared for a more static, constant environment, which wasn't true anymore. They realized that to really be able to move forward at the pace now required, they had to overcome a couple of key challenges. Firstly, bad news was absolutely not welcomed. Nearly all status reports showed green because people were afraid to report anything other than positive progress, which caused some really nasty last-minute issues with projects that were supposed to be green actually being very red, and it only came to light very late in the day. Secondly, trying anything new had been discouraged, meaning that processes and ways of working had not evolved to move on, even with pre-pandemic requirements, leading to inefficiency and a lack of innovation. Thirdly, there was no mechanisms to learn from the past, both good and bad, and such learning was not shared across the organization. So people were duplicating effort and repeating mistakes. So in terms of what they did was, well, they made it clear that no one was going to be penalized for sharing real concerns about the work they were doing. In fact, quite the opposite. They made it clear that helping make delivery better and more reliable would be rewarded. They built on what they'd done in Equip Others and Be Curious to build psychological safety in teams. This became the foundation for the next two actions. So borrowing from agile techniques, they used retrospectives to analyze what had gone on, looked at their work systemically, taking into account the people aspects as well as the tools and processes. They learned from mistakes and issues, and they course corrected as they went. Critically, they made sure that these lessons were shared across the organization. They built a review mechanism so that all new initiatives had to refer to that before starting, therefore helping to avoid repeat issues and continuously improve the whole organization. So the key takeaway, which really is a theme for everything we've said today really, is what worked before is not going to work the same now going forward. So you need to build into your culture this continuous learning experimentation to really be able to seize that opportunity. So just getting some input from you, I'd like to understand, and Emma, if you can bring up that final poll, how frequently are you holding reviews or retrospectives on your working practices or projects? So some quite promising stats there. It's good to see. Okay, so that's actually pretty good. Nearly half of you are reviewing things once or twice a month, which is fantastic news. So that's great. You're on the right track. I guess the key question then is whether that's being used and shared across the whole organisation. So I just kind of want to move on now and close out on the wheel, on this model that we've developed, and just summarise really what the impacts have been that leaders have had on Old Broad Street Bank. So they've really focused on what their purpose is and used it to drive the work they're doing. Their teams have been equipped both physically and mentally, and the two things are both really important. They've built community from communities of practice, but also these sort of water cooler corridor type meetings that they've managed to organise virtually. They've encouraged everyone to show curiosity to and from everyone, and that itself has increased compassion and trust. So in the formula, that's a key enabler of that. And now they're learning, they're innovating, they're experimenting because they feel safe to do it. And again, the key takeaway here is they've seized this opportunity and they've really unlocked the performance. So I'm hoping that by walking through our experiences and sort of structuring in this fictional client, you can see some of the things that have been done. And of course, we're all still learning, and we wouldn't claim to have all the final answers, but these are some real things that we've seen work that we hope you can do. And the takeaway we want to share, and that we'll email you out afterwards, is this kind of what we call it the leadership canvas. So obviously, right in the centre and fundamentals of this is the formula for performance, the equation that we've set out. And then the 5 steps around the outside. And then for each of those steps or stages, we've sort of taken those more or less 3 actions that we've got from each of them that we think you could take away and use yourself. And I'm sure, given what I've seen on the chat, a number of you are already doing, which is great to see. But you know, I'm not sure everyone's doing everything. So hopefully, there's a takeaway from all of you, from what we've shared here. So I'm going to hand back to Pete now to summarise and close out the session.
Thank you, Paul. And really, what we found and what we take a stand for now is that you don't have to look back and hanker for the old world and try to return to the old normal, because the possibilities of creating a new and different operating world are fantastic and massive. I just see the great comment in the chat about the potential for dramatically increasing the talent pool if you recognize that some of the inhibiting practices in the past no longer apply. And if we can listen for different attributes in candidates through through Zoom models, for example, and we can accept that people need and want to and can work in different ways, it opens up a huge range of possibilities for us when we start hiring people. And again, as leaders, so as leaders who behave in different ways, we can create a very different future. We can create new ways of being with people. And I think the 2 really big outcomes are we can create a better working life for people and all of the physical and mental benefits that brings. That will flow through into motivation and discretionary effort, and that will in turn flow through into performance. And certainly one senior executive at a large bank asked me probably middle of the summer, how do I maintain progress and performance and productivity in this environment? And my answer was honest and straightforward. Don't even worry about performance and progress and productivity. Worry about your people and the kind of elements that we've just talked about. Show compassion, build trust, create communities. And if you can do that, then performance will flow as a direct consequence. So shift the focus and shift the lens. But if you take away just 3 things today that you can do as leaders of people, it would be show compassion, build trust, and create communities for those who work in and around you. And this is a real unique opportunity and a real unique time for us to show that leadership and create those breakthroughs with our people, inspiring them to a very different future. On behalf of Aaron and Paul and Deborah, then, and myself and everybody at Sonic, thank you again for giving us your attention this afternoon. And we wish you a very, very happy Christmas and all the very best for 2021.